Meetings are, of course, an important part and an even necessary part of working in a church. I've found that weekly staff meetings often become a place where problems surface, but no one seems to know what caused it, and certainly nobody wants to take responsibility for it. There's that phrase, "That's not my job." And sometimes in those meetings, that phrase is kind of written on everybody's face. Nobody wants to take responsibility. Many years ago, I was a youth pastor at a church in the south suburbs of Chicago. And in moments like this, when a problem would arise and no one was taking responsibility for it, my lead pastor would often repeat a little saying. It's a story about four people. And the names of the people are everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. You may have heard the story before. It goes like this. There was an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. I've used this story in staff meetings over the years. It illustrates an important idea about responsibility. If something needs to be done, it's everybody's job. Healthy organizations are built by people who take ownership before they're forced to do it. Strong followers don't wait to be told what to do. They step in when responsibility is needed. And as we've talked throughout this class, we've been talking about how we give a lot of attention to leaders and we overlook the value that followers provide. In this session, we're going to again focus on the importance of following, and we're going to start by looking at a well-known story in the Old Testament. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1, it says this. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. So this verse contrasts David's actions with the actions of his army. His men are doing what they're supposed to do. They're going to war. But David, on the other hand, is clearly not doing what he's supposed to do. He's staying home. And so this verse, as we know, it introduces the story of David's sin with Bathsheba. And the story now will span just about 2 chapters. But it ends with an important verse about followership. So we're going to skip down to the end of chapter 12. But before I read it, I just want to highlight that the siege that's mentioned here in verse 1 is against Rabbah. Now let's look at the end of the story in the next chapter. It says this in verses 26 and 28. Meanwhile, Joab fought against Rabbah of the Ammonites and captured the royal citadel. Joab then sent messengers to David saying, I have fought against Rabbah and taken its water supply. Now muster the rest of the troops and besiege the city and capture it. Otherwise, I will take the city and it will be named after me. Now, we've, of course, skipped a lot of content. Chapter 11 tells us the story of David's sin. Chapter 12, it opens with the prophet Nathan rebuking David, and then we read about the loss of David's son. The scholar Harry Hoffner points out that the story of the Ammonite War serves as a frame around the account of David, Bathsheba, and Uriah. So it starts talking about the war, and it ends talking about the war. And throughout that chapter and a half, what's been happening? David has been in conflict with Yahweh. So while David was battling Yahweh at the palace, Joab and his men were battling the Ammonites at Rabbah. So by the end of chapter 12, Joab understands that his task was not just simply about winning battles. Joab realizes that his role was to support the king, and more importantly, to support the kingdom. It says this in verse 29. So David mustered the entire army and went to Rabbah and attacked and captured it. So consider what this follower, what Joab, accomplishes here. In 2 Samuel 11, it opens with David at home while his army fights. In chapter 12, that concludes with David now going out to lead his men, something that he should have been doing from the very beginning. Joab's actions accomplish two things. First, he honors his leader. So Joab understood that winning the battle himself would create some potential unnecessary tension, and that tension would distract from the needs of the kingdom. He knows that the city would be named after him. He knows that he would get recognition and not David. Maybe Joab is aware of what happened between David and Saul prior to this. Remember, when David won his battles, the people wrote songs about it. Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands. How did that work out? There was a lot of tension in that relationship because of it. And Joab doesn't want songs like that sung about him, so he honors his leader. But in addition to that, he leads his leader. The follower leads his leader. Joab puts pressure on David to do what he should have been doing all along, going off to war with the men, not staying back at the palace and ending up in battle with Yahweh. Joab saw the failure of his king. He saw the deficiency of his leadership. And instead of ignoring that, he acted for the good of the king and the kingdom. He courageously did the hard work of fighting the battle, the hard work of redirecting his leader, and he set David up for an easy win. Why? Because Joab put the values of the kingdom first. In our first class, we talked about how the leader and follower interact in light of the organization's purpose and values. Now, if Joab had put David at the center, the leader at the center, he would have followed orders, he would have achieved the victory, and he would have allowed David to descend into further failure. Or Joab perhaps could have put himself in the center. And if he did that, he would have intentionally sought fame and recognition at David's expense. But instead, he put the purpose and the values of the kingdom at the center. And although he's technically a follower, what he did is he took initiative and he led with strength. This is what it means to be a strong follower. Followers often have a perspective that the leader doesn't. So followers need to step in and help carry responsibility when their leaders have a blind spot or when they fall short. Now, I want to drill down some more on this kind of leadership. Chalif would call this kind of person a courageous follower. In his book, he identifies several different dimensions of courageous followership. We're going to look at 2 in this class, 2 in the next session, and then 1 in the final session. So let's look at the first 2 here. The first is the courage to assume responsibility. This relates to the story that we talked about at the beginning of the session. Everybody blames somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. At our church, there is a line in every job description that says, perform other tasks as requested by the lead pastor. Now, as the lead pastor, I like this line a lot, but I'm guessing my staff doesn't as much. Sometimes what you think is not your job might just become your job. Now, I don't do a bait and switch with my staff. If something needs to change in a job description, we've had plenty of conversations about that. We work through it together. But the point is this. It isn't solely the task of the lead pastor or the boss to identify areas of responsibility. Again, Ira Chalif, he puts it this way. He says, courageous followers assume responsibility for themselves and the organization. They do not hold a paternalistic image of the leader or organization. They do not expect the leader or organization to provide for their security and growth or to give them permission to act. This is really important for both lead pastors and staff pastors to understand. Lead pastors, allow your staff to step up. Give them space and permission to do that. And staff pastors, take initiative, assume responsibility, take a risk. As leaders, we tend to be good at delegating tasks, but we need to balance that by delegating authority as well. So you do this by creating guardrails or boundaries. An example of this would be a budget. When you have a budget, your team has authority to spend within the budgeted amounts. You don't need to approve every single little purchase. And the same can be true about other responsibilities around the church. Yes, delegate tasks, but also delegate authority. And if you're worried about that authority going too far, that authority can have limits, but make it clear. A lot of leaders say they want their team members to take initiative, but then they control every decision and they micromanage every detail. This is something I struggle with. I'm a type A perfectionist, and I have to watch out for this area in my leadership. I have to intentionally give my team space and permission to take responsibility. Otherwise, I end up controlling too much. And so if I want my team to assume responsibility, I have to give them the tools and the permission to do so. So the second dimension of courageous leadership, it flows out of the first. So we have the courage to assume responsibility, and the second is the courage to serve. This dimension, combined with the previous dimension, because they really go hand in hand, it's not just assuming any random area of responsibility. You want to look for areas of responsibility that specifically serve your leader. Serving your leader is more than just simply saying to them, hey, what can I do for you? Or what do you need? Those are good questions, but they're passive. They require the leader to take an active role in the process. Instead, a courageous follower anticipates and is proactive. They identify what's needed. They take initiative. You have a good perspective of what your leader does not see, so leverage that perspective that you have for the good of the whole. Chalif puts it this way. He says, courageous followers are not afraid of the hard work required to serve a leader. They assume new or additional responsibilities to unburden the leader and serve the organization. They stay alert for areas in which their strengths complement the leaders, and they assert themselves in these areas. Now, I want to be clear that Chalif isn't talking or suggesting that followers just wait on their leaders hand and foot. And we're not talking about getting their coffee order or washing their car on the weekend or picking up their dry cleaning. Good followers recognize what they bring to the table, and they leverage that strength. They don't try to replicate their leader's skills. They don't minimize their own skills. Instead, they understand how to best support and balance their leader's competencies. A biblical example of this is Aaron and Hur in Exodus 17. God's people in that chapter are in a battle against the Amalekites. And during that battle, Moses goes up to the top of a hill. Whenever he raises his staff, the people are winning. And whenever he lowers his hand, the Amalekites begin to win. So Aaron and Hur set up a stone. Moses sits down on it, and then they hold his hands up. But notice what they don't do. They didn't criticize Moses. They certainly didn't say, that's not my job. Moses, you got to hold your hands up better than that. They don't do that. Instead, they saw a need, and they stepped in to help carry the weight, literally his arms. That's what the courage to serve looks like, stepping in with a solution without being asked. Healthy organizations are not built by leaders who carry everything alone. They are built by courageous followers who help carry the responsibility. Doing this requires a much broader view of the church and the organization. It can't just be about our own silo or what we're doing in ourselves. Several years ago, Craig Groeschel talked about this idea on his leadership podcast. Specifically, he was talking about moving from an employee to an employer. I think for the sake of this class, we can think of terms of moving from a follower to a courageous follower. But he says that in order to do this, you don't just want to get better at what you do, although that's important. You want to get better at what you think. He says leadership isn't just as much about what you do, but it's about what you think. So he says think like an owner, not like an employee. He says this, first, employees work for the business. Owners work on the business. If you go to a fast food restaurant, you're most likely dealing with people who think like employees. They're not worried about how quick the drive-thru is moving. They're just taking orders. To serve your leader, you don't just need to do your work. You should think higher and consider how you can improve the whole. Second, Groeschel says employees spend money, owners invest money. Staff pastors, don't just view your budget as money that you are owed or money that you're allowed to just burn through. Consider the value and the impact of your spending overall. Because remember, after all, this isn't your money and your budget. This is the Lord's tithe, and this is coming from the widow's mite. Third, Groeschel says, employees say, what's in it for me? Owners say, what's in it for the business? So, kids pastors, And your kids' ministry is important, but recognize that what you do impacts the rest of the church. Don't just build up your own silo. Understand that you have something to offer the church as a whole. You're raising up future givers. You are raising up future worshipers. Groeschel summarizes that we need to learn to think higher because how you think determines who you become, see broader because what you see determines where you can go, and care deeper because what you care about determines what you can be trusted with. So let's look at these one at a time. First, think higher. Now, I want you to notice that this doesn't say be smarter, because this isn't about intelligence. This isn't about what you know, it's about how you think. As a follower, you need to have a posture of constant learning and growth. So find a mentor. Find someone that you can ask questions to about how you're working and what you're accomplishing. Don't just understand what you're doing, but understand why you are doing it. So when you're doing tasks, ask questions. Is there another way that I could accomplish this task? Why am I doing this thing? Does this task even need to be done? And if it does need to be accomplished, then do I need to be the one that's doing this? Or is there someone else that I can delegate responsibility and authority to, and then that will help them develop their skills? If something isn't working well, think about solutions. I mean, a lot of times in our churches, things don't work well. So instead of ignoring it, instead of just passing it off to your leader, think about solutions. Think through answers. Now, depending on the issue, you can try to fix this on your own, especially if it's within your area of responsibility and authority. And if you try a couple of solutions to that problem, and if they don't work out, then go to your leader. Talk to your leader and show your leader what you've done, how you've identified the problem, what different solutions you've attempted, and explain, I've done these things in my area of responsibility and authority, but I think I need approval to kind of go outside of this to try to fix this problem. Go have that conversation. Don't just say, well, it's not my responsibility. If you do this, if you will take time and effort and work on it and have a conversation like this with your leader about extending authority or responsibility to fix a problem, if you do that, that will be a gift to your leader. So first, you need to think higher, but then second, see broader. As I've said throughout this course, as a follower, you have a perspective on your church or your organization that your leader does not have. And oftentimes, you're going to see things that your leader can't see. It's not that they don't want to see. Sometimes they just can't see it. So you have eyes on those things. So look. Don't just focus on your own areas of responsibilities. See beyond your department. See beyond your job description. If you have something to offer, then offer it. Do you see something that's not being done? Is there a gap? Then start doing it. Fill in. Is your leader overwhelmed or stretched to the limit? Don't just ask, hey, what can I do for you? No, look and identify tasks that you know that you can do, and that especially ones that you know you can do well. Start doing them and provide that kind of support for your leader. Third, care deeper. When it comes to care, I think there's a motivation that's part of this. And with that in mind, don't wait to be asked to do something. That's really what we've been talking about here. Take initiative. Care enough to get involved. There are some leaders who are great about barking out orders, but many are not. For myself, I don't like asking my team to do things because usually it's stuff that I can do myself. And I just think, I'll just take care of it. It's easy. I'll just get it done. And what happens is then I get overwhelmed because I'm doing too much. And maybe some of you that are leaders, you're wired the same way. You think it's faster if I do it myself. It's easier for me if I just take care of it. And that might be true initially, but that will ultimately lead to burnout and to frustration. And what it does is it teaches your followers to be passive, and it fails to develop their leadership. We're not talking about making widgets for a multinational conglomerate corporation here. We're talking about the kingdom of God. And your care for the kingdom should extend past your job description, and it should extend past the specific instructions that your leader gives you. Followers who care deeply don't wait to be invited into responsibility. I might suggest a stronger word for care here. Don't just care about your church, love your church. Craig Rochelle, again, he says, care deeper because what you care about determines what you can be trusted with. That last line really sums up what we're talking about in this session. Trust. Lead pastor, you need to build trust with your team and give your team room to lead courageously. So what is one area that you can start doing that in today? Who can you delegate authority and responsibility to? Staff pastors, you need to stop having an "it's not my job" mentality, and you need to earn trust. What is one way you can start to serve your leader today? Having the courage to take responsibility and to serve can be hard. It's important that followers take responsibility, but it's equally important that leaders give responsibility. We'll look at two more aspects of courageous leadership in our next session.